Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Multipliers Podcast. I'll be your host for today. My name is Mehdi, and it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest, Timothy Kopra, a former NASA astronaut and experienced leader who brings a wealth of insights and experience on space exploration, teamwork, and innovation. Tim, thank you for joining me today's episode.
Oh, thanks for having me today.
Can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
So my name is Tim Kopra. I grew up in Austin, Texas. My dad was a college professor. I went to school at West Point. It's the United States Military Academy, and became infatuated by space when I was 6 years old. And then, interestingly, when I was at West Point as a plebe, at the very beginning, we had 3 former Apollo astronauts come and speak to the Corps of Cadets. And it was really a seminal moment because I realized, if I work really hard and study and maybe try to take the same path, maybe that's an opportunity for me in the future. And super fortunate, I became an astronaut back in 2000. I took a pretty traditional path in the military as an aviator, but then the military sent me back to graduate school at Georgia Tech, Navy Test Pilot School, experimental test pilot for a couple of years, and then had the chance to be an astronaut for 18 years. Went to space twice. First time for 2 months. I was both a space shuttle and a space station crew member. Flew up on Space Shuttle Endeavour. Spent 2 months on board as a space station crew member. Came home on Space Shuttle Discovery. In between the 2 missions I had, I went to grad school for a business degree, and then had the opportunity to be trained as the co-pilot in a Russian Soyuz. Went up and down on a Soyuz, spent 6 months on board. Was commander of space station during the second half, did 3 spacewalks. Really amazing opportunity, and super grateful for all those different chances I had in life. But I knew that when I left NASA, I wanted to do something in business. So a friend of mine and I from business school formed a venture fund in energy tech. That was quite successful. Was recruited off to work at a company called MDA Space, ran the robotics and space operations for a couple of years, did a turnaround in satellites, and then started working at Voyager Space as the CEO of Nanoracks, which is a company that takes care of the entire value chain of getting things to space: ideation, design, build, assemble, test, and fly. And along the way, Nanoracks had won an award from NASA to build the successor to the International Space Station. And Voyager, the parent of Nanoracks, formed a joint venture between Voyager Space and Airbus, and made this an independent company called Starlab Space, where I'm now the CEO. So it's been a fun ride.
Definitely. I mean, this sounds phenomenal. 3 spacewalks. What was that like?
It's pretty wild. We train for spacewalks in this big pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's the size of a lake. It's 40 feet deep, 200 feet across, 100 feet wide, and it has a mock-up of the International Space Station in it. And when you're doing that training, you get inside an airlock, which in real life is your door to space. And when you look out that hatch before you do your training, you're looking at the bottom of the pool. But when you do a spacewalk, you open the hatch, you're looking down at the planet that's 250 miles below you, going 5 miles a second. So it takes your breath away. But thankfully, the training that we do is so thorough that you know what your next steps are, and you go outside. But that first spacewalk, you're holding on for dear life. You're trying to tell yourself, you don't need to grip that hard. And it's funny that we call it spacewalks, because it's really more of a space crawl. All your mobility is with your hands. You have a whole set of tools, lots of tasks to do, but pretty amazing. You can look out the windows on space station. We have this cupola on board space station called, this cupola, and it's like a glass bottom boat. It's 6 big windows in a circle, and then a large window in the center. And, looking out there, you feel like you're almost outside, but it is not the same as doing a spacewalk where you have complete field of view, and you're separated by the vacuum of space by this piece of plexiglass that goes across your face. So pretty phenomenal experience. And, feeling completely disconnected from planet Earth on that spacewalk is quite memorable.
I'm speechless. I mean, I'm just listening to all of this. I'm trying to visualize it, and it's just...
Well, it's funny, as I'm describing it, I'm thinking through that experience, and it's still like it was yesterday.
I have a smile on my face for those who are listening. That I just feel like a little kid now. Can you share some of the special moments that you experienced when you were up on the space station?
Yeah, there's several times during the entire space sequence that are very memorable, and actually the times that your life's in peril when you launch because you're on a rocket, when you do a spacewalk, or when you come back home. I think, some of the most memorable experiences are those ones that are really punctuated by the pressure to perform. And certainly that's true on a spacewalk. It's also true on robotics. So the way that we get our cargo on board space station now is you sit in cupola, that big glass bottom boat, and you manually fly robotic arm, and you grab this large cargo vehicle that's hovering outside your space station. Like, you don't want to mess that up. So that's kind of a high pressure scenario. Going uphill on a shuttle and a Soyuz, it's not much different in terms of the physical phenomena, but when you come home on a Soyuz, it's like the most violent amusement park ride you could possibly imagine. That's probably one of the most memorable experiences. You undock from station, about 45 minutes of just drifting away from station, and then you start to burn the engine to slow down, and the slower you get, the more drag there is, and then it starts this whole sequence of events. And then you separate the two little pieces on this Soyuz that you don't need, and these explosive bolts are right above your head, these 19 explosive bolts. You hear this huge boom, and then it's like this wild ride coming home. You're coming in at 5.2 Gs. You can see the plasma going by the windows, and when the chute deploys, it is amazing how violent that is. Then the parachute rehooks, and it's another violent thing. And then you hit the ground so hard that you spend like 10 seconds doing this personal inventory to make sure nothing is broken. And then you get drug out of this thing, like breech berth rather. You get pulled out of this space station or this little spaceship, and you're put on a helicopter and then flown back to an airplane, and you get back home within 24 hours. So like this whole sequence of events, you leave space station and you're back home like in 25 hours. It's just really a crazy thing.
And how does your body adjust? Like when you're out of space, there's no gravity. When you come back to Earth, there's gravity. How does your body adjust?
Yeah, on both sides, when you first get there and when you come home, those are really a very physical kind of thing. Because when you first get to space, most crew members don't feel very good. You're not used to this zero-G environment, and it takes a few days to feel better. In fact, when I did that first spacewalk, we launched on flight day 1. We increased our orbit flight day 2. We docked on 3. And then the morning of 4, I did a spacewalk. I wasn't really even adjusted. But what's fascinating about the human body and brain is we completely adapt to our environment. So within really 6 weeks, your brain does this matrix transformation every time you move. So you can be upside down, or whatever that means, or right side up, and it's like it feels completely normal. But all those mechanisms that tell you which way is up, your neurovestibular system, your skin, your eyes, all those things are turned off. And so when you get home, it's like a combination of the flu and a hangover for 2 days. But then within 2 weeks, all the things that they measure, like your endurance and agility and strength, they're about normal.
You need to be a very special human being to be able to do that. Knock on wood.
I don't know about that, but I was super fortunate to have the chance. Yeah.
So being on the space station, you said that you were the commander of the space station. So that's more like the CEO of a company, right?
Kind of, a little different, but yeah.
But in a very high pressured environment, because like any small mistake, it could lead to a disaster. So how do you build and maintain the trust among the crew on the space station?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, it's a great question. A lot of it comes from the training ahead of time. And, what's interesting about space station is you have crew of 6, but you really train mostly with a crew of 3 back in the day, because we were going up and down on Soyuz before the SpaceX Crew Dragon was ready. And so you're pretty tight with that crew, but then you're changing out the other 3 crews. And I think it's good to be super even-keeled and to be super respectful. And it really goes back to the way they select astronauts. I was on 2 selection committees for the astronaut corps, once in 2013, again in 2017. And when you're interviewing candidates, by and large, I think especially the astronauts are sitting around the table during that interview process, you're thinking about like, who do you want to go camping with, right? Like, what does that mean? It means like somebody who can take care of themselves. When you go camping, you roll up your sleeping bag, you clean up your site, you prepare all your stuff, and you're self-sufficient. You're not a burden to anybody else. You're also a good follower, and a good follower is someone who intrinsically knows how to fit into the team. And then a good leader knows the people and how to bring those folks together to have a synergistic action between those team members. And I think, those lessons are applicable on space station. They're certainly applicable in other leadership positions. But I would say that being the commander on station is different than being a CEO, in that a lot of the work, frankly, is done by the ground. Like the ground team is planning out the day. They've trained you. When you're the crew member on board, you're really executing things that someone else has planned out for you. You have to have the skills, but the interpersonal thing, certainly CEO lessons. The other thing is that the one time that it's very important to have the commanders if something goes wrong. On space station, there are 3 primary emergencies. If you had a fire, and by and large, the station is designed, you're not going to have fires. You might have smoke or something, but it's not the biggest concern. Toxic atmosphere, because it's high pressure ammonia that does the heat transfer. Very unlikely, but if it happened, it would be catastrophic. But the third one is if you had a depress event, like if you had a breach, like a small meteor hits your station, causes a hole, be able to isolate that. And what that requires is more of a command-oriented leadership style. By and large, even as a CEO, rarely, I think, is the command style is appropriate. And then, along with command is consultative and consensus. On station, I would say it's largely consensus-based, but
Consensus.
yeah. But in the real world, consensus may not be the best way. Consultative, you have to move things along. You need to advance. You need to be open to new ideas. But if you're trying to build consensus, and as the leader, you have the vision, you need to move on that vision. But you also need to be receptive for where you may be flawed or a little bit off kilter with what that vision is.
It's interesting, this distinction that you made between consultative and
consensus.
Consensus.
Yeah, for sure. It's very different. Yeah. And it's different than collaboration. Like collaboration is much closer to consultative, because collaboration means you take all the ideas. At the end of the day, there needs to be a decision, and there's different timelines for decisions. I think about this all the time. Like, you don't want to be too slow, but you certainly don't want to be too fast either with decision making. Like sometimes things mature in a way that you need more time. Mm-hmm. So I think about the timing for decisions a lot these days.
And so all of that experience, how has it cascaded to help you now running Starlab Space?
Well, I think, especially in this modern era where technology is so advanced and specialized, I'm so fortunate to have this ability to lead a space station company. Very personally rewarding, because the International Space Station, probably the most amazing achievement of mankind. It's on par with the pyramids. We built this amazing structure in space. We've had a permanent presence in low Earth orbit since 2000. We've had astronauts on board ever since. And the operations are amazing. But it's also at the cost of thousands of people. In this new era, we're going to transition from government ownership of a space station to commercial ownership that provides it as a service to NASA, the European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, Canada, and others. We'd love to do that in the UAE as well. But what that means is that we have to be very efficient. And so that's the reason we have a whole set of partners to include Palantir. It's going to be very OpEx efficient. So for me, it's personally rewarding to take the great lessons learned and the skill set and the tribal knowledge that's been built out of that, especially at Johnson Space Center and with the other space agencies, apply what it makes the most sense, but then also make all those improvements that have been difficult to make over time.
And how important is this new space station for the future of humanity as a whole?
I think it's massively important. For one, all the space agencies, especially NASA that has exploration objectives, needs to continue that, because, for example, zero gravity is not kind to the human body. It affects your eyes, your muscles, your bones, and we have countermeasures for it, but it's certainly not perfect, and there's a lot more to learn. At the same time, in this commercial era, we can also take advantage of this burgeoning space market. So there's several different industries we see as ones where you can make incredible advancements because of the zero-G environment, especially around semiconductors, life sciences, pharmaceuticals. That zero-G environment gives you the capability to do things you cannot do on Earth. And so,
can you tell us a few examples?
Yeah, for sure. For example, with semiconductors, in zero-G, you don't have sedimentation, you don't have buoyancy, conduction, convection is different. We think that in the future, first there's going to be R&D. In the future, we'll be able to produce orders of magnitude better chips. Not entire fab, but like the individual crystals that you can grow in space. In pharmaceuticals, one example is that Merck used one of their billion-dollar cancer drugs called Keytruda, and they're able to make en masse the protein crystal of that drug. What can that do? It could change the delivery mechanism. It could change the side effects. But from a business perspective, it could extend the patent. And it's a $1.2 trillion industry that puts 15% of its profits back into R&D every year. So we just think that and some of the life sciences things that are going on board Space Station right now, they sound like science fiction.
Growing limbs?
Yeah, well, not limbs so far, maybe someday. But some of my former colleagues on the space station bioprinted a human knee meniscus and vascularized it. There's a company on board Space Station right now that is bioprinting retinas. Like, think about that. Like the
eye retinas.
Yeah, human eye retinas. Like, imagine if we make this like the norm. So what could that do to people that are blind or have their vision impaired? I just think that the future is going to be things that are almost hard to even predict, and they're going to be enabled by that zero-G environment.
It really does sound like science fiction.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
And companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, I mean, are they helping or?
Well, we have a contract with SpaceX to launch on Starship at late 28, early 29. And, I'm from Texas. Texas is really moving out in space. So SpaceX is doing their development work for Starship down in Boca Chica, Texas. You probably have seen Starship get captured by the big chopsticks.
Yes.
Massive vehicle. I think it's going to be very disruptive across the industry. But for us, it's a reason that we can launch a space station in a single launch. So I don't have to build in space like I did on my first mission. So a space station that's about 8 meters across, 3 stories tall, 40% of the volume of the International Space Station in a single launch with all the R&D capacity. So, not having to build in space or spend a bunch of money for multiple launches or do all the work on the ground to make sure that the design matches the build. Like, we avoid all that. And it's 100% enabled by this innovation from SpaceX, this new Starship vehicle.
And what about things like mining asteroids? I mean, is this super far-fetched or?
It's not far-fetched. I think it's far in the future. And there's been some companies that that was their value proposition. They're not around anymore. So that tells you something. And look, there are people that are much smarter on this than I am. But like, say, for example, we lassoed this massive platinum asteroid and brought it back to Earth. Does that mean that everybody's a trillionaire? No, it means that platinum is like 10. So, supply and demand curve, I don't know. I think, if in the future, and I don't know this to be true, but if we were going to run out of nickel, well, nickel's a pretty important thing. So, maybe someday. I think it's pretty far out there. I'm most excited about low Earth orbit because it's so accessible. We know how to build space stations. We know how to enable industries. It's not easy. There's certainly challenges along the way, but it's right there. Like space station right now, International Space Station, 400 kilometers above the Earth. Ours will be probably at 500 kilometers, but it's not that far away. And there's amazing things you can do in that zero-G environment.
Maybe space tourism could be something that becomes the norm in like 20 years, 30 years?
Well, it becomes the norm when everyone has a very large bank account because it's
still expensive.
It's going to be very expensive for a long time unless we reinvent how we do launches, and that's going to be some sort of new science we currently don't understand. It's going to be expensive. So I think at least for the near term, there will be people that can afford a 2 to 4 week trip, and I think that would be amazing. I think it's life-changing. It was life-changing for me. But in large measure, it's going to be a public-private partnership. It'll be the domain of sovereign nations that want to have astronaut programs and do a variety of things that meet their own objectives.
And what advice would you want to give to young kids who would want to become astronauts? I mean, is this a cool job or
Well, it's funny. Alan Bean, one of my favorite astronauts, he passed away not too long ago, but he would come to our astronaut reunions. We have those every 2 years. And one time he was given a presentation. He said that when people would ask him the best part about being an astronaut, he'd say the job title. Yeah. And it's a little tongue in cheek because it is a hard job in many ways. I mean, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, for me, very fulfilling, but it's hard work. Long path to get there, highly uncertain, stressful at times. But if you like that kind of thing, and, I think I was just an adventuresome kid and it was an exact suit for me and I was very lucky. But like in terms of advice for young people, there's nothing better than having a great education. Like when you learn math, it's like teaching your brain how to think. It's like lifting weights for your brain. Or when you learn how to write and communicate in written form and in speaking form, it opens all kinds of doors for you. If you learn history, you learn how other people have done great things and made mistakes so we can live vicariously through that. So I think education is absolutely prime. And then probably the most important thing is going back to, basic skills like play well with others, because it's certainly a team sport. There's nothing about human spaceflight that doesn't require teamwork.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tim, this has been fantastic. This has been exceptionally insightful. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. And I don't think I'm ever going to have another rocket man on the podcast ever again. It's a big honor for us, for you to share your time with us and to share your knowledge and your experience and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today and see you on the next episode.